There's a moment in American automotive history that General Motors would rather you forget. A brief, glorious window when the corporation's left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, when engineers ignored the rules, and when the most powerful muscle car ever built rolled off the assembly line wearing an innocent-looking Chevrolet badge. Everyone remembers the Hemi Cuda, the Boss Mustangs, and the GTOs that started it all. But what if I told you that the single most dominant street machine of the muscle car era, the car that made insurance companies panic and forced Detroit to change its ways, was a mid-size family sedan from Chevrolet that wasn't supposed to exist? In 1970, while corporate executives preached restraint and responsibility, while safety advocates demanded an end to the horsepower wars, and while emission regulations began strangling performance, Chevrolet released a monster. They called it the Chevelle SS 454 LS6, and it produced more advertised horsepower than any other production muscle car in history. 450 horsepower, 450 foot-pounds of torque, numbers that wouldn't be matched by mainstream factory muscle for about 40 years. This wasn't just Chevrolet's most powerful A-body ever built. It was the car that ended an era, the final thunderclap before the storm, the last true supercar before everything changed forever. And here's what makes this story remarkable. GM's own corporate policy said it couldn't exist. Insurance companies tried to kill it before it was born, and the government would soon make sure nothing like it could ever happen again. To understand why the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 was such an impossibility, you need to understand where General Motors stood in January of 1970. The corporation was under siege from every direction. Ralph Nader had just spent 4 years attacking Detroit's safety record, turning unsafe at any speed into a bestseller and the Corvair into a cautionary tale. Insurance companies, seeing young men wrapping high-powered cars around trees at alarming rates, had begun implementing surcharges that made muscle cars financially devastating to own. Safety advocates pointed to rising traffic fatalities and demanded action. Environmentalists, empowered by the first Earth Day in April of 1970, identified automobile emissions as public enemy number one. The federal government, responding to these pressures, had begun drafting regulations that would fundamentally transform the industry. Corporate executives at GM, already gun-shy after years of criticism, had implemented internal policies designed to keep the company out of trouble. One of these policies, established in 1967, prohibited installing engines larger than 400 cubic inches in intermediate-sized cars like the Chevelle, Tempest, and Skylark. The rule was meant to prevent GM from appearing too aggressive in the performance market, to keep insurance rates manageable for customers, and to demonstrate corporate responsibility to critics who accused Detroit of building dangerous machines. For 3 years, this policy held firm. The largest engine you could get in a Chevelle was the 396 cubic inch Big Block, a torquey motor that made respectable power, but couldn't match the Hemi Mopars or Ford's Big Block Torinos. Chevrolet engineers chafed under these restrictions, watching Ford and Chrysler stuff massive engines into mid-sized bodies while GM played it safe. Something had to give. The catalyst for change came from an unexpected source: competition. In 1969, Ford had begun offering their 429 Cobra Jet in the Torino and Mercury Cyclone. Chrysler packed 440 Magnum and 426 Hemi engines into Chargers, Roadrunners, and Super Bs. Plymouth stuffed Hemis into Cudas. Dodge put them in Challengers. Pontiac, operating within GM but somehow immune to the rules, shoehorned the 400-cube Ram Air 4 into the GTO and even offered a 455 in the Grand Prix. Buick built the Grand Sport Stage 1 with 455 cubes. Oldsmobile dropped the 455 into the 442. Every GM division except Chevrolet was bending or ignoring the intermediate engine size limit. Meanwhile, Chevrolet, the corporation's volume performance brand, the division that was supposed to lead in the youth market, was hamstrung by following rules that everyone else ignored. Dealers complained, racers complained. Magazine editors wrote articles questioning why Chevrolet couldn't compete with its own corporate siblings, let alone Ford and Chrysler. The pressure mounted throughout 1969 until finally, in late summer, the dam broke. GM executives, facing reality, quietly rescinded the engine size limit for the 1970 model year. The decision came too late for most divisions to take full advantage, but Chevrolet was ready. They'd been working on contingency plans for months, knowing the policy couldn't last. When the green light finally came, Chevrolet's engineers already had the perfect weapon waiting: the LS6 454 cubic inch Mark IV big block, the most powerful production engine General Motors had ever built. The LS6 wasn't created specifically for the Chevelle. It evolved from the L72 427 that had powered Corvettes and Copo Camaros. But with 27 additional cubic inches and lessons learned from years of racing development, the displacement increase came from boring the cylinders 4.250 inches and stroking the crankshaft 4 inches, creating a combination that maximized the Mark IV block's capacity without requiring exotic components. But raw displacement alone doesn't create legendary performance. The LS6's brilliance lay in how that displacement was utilized. Start with the foundation. 4-bolt main bearing caps on the center, 3 journals for bottom-end rigidity, where crankshaft loads were highest. The crankshaft was forged steel, not cast iron, internally balanced and tuft-righted for surface hardness. Connecting rods were forged steel, shot-peened to resist fatigue, with 7 16-inch diameter bolts securing the caps. Pistons were forged aluminum with a compression ratio of 11.25 to 1, high enough to extract maximum energy from premium fuel, but not so extreme that the engine became unreliable. The cylinder heads were the key to the LS6's power. These open-chamber aluminum castings featured high-flow rectangular intake ports and generously sized exhaust ports to move enormous volumes of air. Valves were massive, 2.19-inch diameter intakes and 1.88-inch exhausts, more than adequate for the engine's breathing requirements. The valve train used a solid lifter camshaft with aggressive timing and lift designed to make power from 3,000 RPM to 6,000 RPM. Valve springs were dual coil, capable of controlling the valves at redline without excessive pressure that would accelerate wear. The induction system matched the engine's character. An aluminum high-rise intake manifold positioned a Holley 800 cubic feet per minute 4-barrel carburetor high above the valley, improving mixture distribution to all 8 cylinders. The air cleaner was an open element design that breathed freely while meeting emission requirements. The exhaust manifolds were cast iron, restrictive by racing standards but adequate for street use, dumping into a dual exhaust system with minimal baffling that produced a sound unlike anything else on American roads. When Chevrolet engineering finished dyno testing the LS6, they had a problem. The numbers were too good. The engine produced 450 horsepower at 5,600 RPM and 500 foot-pounds of torque at 3,600 RPM, using the industry standard gross measurement method. These were honest numbers verified by independent testing, but they created a dilemma. Advertising an engine with 450 horsepower would attract unwanted attention from safety advocates, insurance companies, and government regulators who were already targeting high-performance cars. Some voices within GM suggested rating it more conservatively, perhaps 425 horsepower, to avoid scrutiny. But Chevrolet's marketing department recognized an opportunity. 450 horsepower was a round number, a psychological threshold, a marketing hook that couldn't be ignored. More importantly, it was the truth. After years of every manufacturer understating power figures to dodge insurance rates, here was an engine whose actual output matched its advertised rating. The decision was made. They'd publish the real numbers and let the chips fall where they may. It was a gamble that would have consequences. Installing the LS6 in the Chevelle created the SS 454, officially regular production option, or RPO Z15 combined with RPO LS6. The package included far more than just the engine. The cowl induction hood, RPO ZL2, featured a rear-facing scoop that opened under full throttle, pulling cool air from the high-pressure area at the base of the windshield. The suspension received heavy-duty components, stiffer springs, larger diameter stabilizer bars, and premium shock absorbers designed to control the car's substantial weight. The 12-bolt rear axle came with limited slip differential and a choice of gear ratios, from highway-friendly 3.07 to 1 to acceleration-focused 4.10 to 1. The brakes were upgraded to power-assisted front discs and rear drums, adequate for normal driving but marginal for the car's performance envelope. The transmission options were a close-ratio Muncie M22 4-speed manual, nicknamed the Rock Crusher for its straight-cut gears and distinctive whine, or the Turbo Hydra-matic 400 automatic, the only automatic transmission tough enough to survive behind the LS6. Inside, the SS package brought bucket seats, a center console, gauges that actually worked, and not much else. This wasn't a luxury car. The Chevelle SS 454 was a machine built for one purpose: devastating straight-line acceleration. Typical stickers landed around $4,400 to $4,900, depending on options and axle choice. Serious money in 1970, when you could buy a loaded Impala for under $4,000. You could walk into a dealership, sign papers, and drive home in a machine that would humiliate cars costing twice as much. The performance numbers shocked everyone, including Chevrolet. Magazine tests recorded quarter-mile times in the 13.1-second range at over 107 miles per hour. Bone stock, running on bias ply street tires with a full interior and exhaust system. 0 to 60 miles per hour required just 5.4 seconds. These times came from automatic-equipped cars, considered slightly slower than the manual transmission versions. 4-speed cars with optimal gearing and an experienced driver could dip into the high 12-second range completely stock. More impressive than the times was how the car delivered its performance. The LS6 pulled hard from idle, building power in a relentless wave that never stopped. There was no waiting for power band, no need to rev it out. You planted your foot at any speed, in any gear, and the Chevelle lunged forward like it had been rear-ended by a freight train. The torque was everywhere, all the time, available on demand from under 2,000 RPM to past 6,000. This wasn't a peaky race motor that needed precise shifting in optimal conditions. This was tractor pull power, bulldozer torque, the automotive equivalent of a sledgehammer. The sound alone was worth the price of admission. At idle, the LS6 produced a lopey, irregular cadence as the aggressive camshaft timing created overlap where intake and exhaust valves were open simultaneously. The solid lifters clattered, a mechanical symphony that told anyone within earshot this wasn't a normal engine. Blip the throttle and the carburetors gulped air with an audible whoosh, the exhaust barking with sharp reports that echoed off buildings. Under acceleration, the sound transformed into something primal, a bellowing roar that built in intensity and volume as the tach swept clockwise, punctuated by the mechanical whine of the M22 transmission gears meshing and separating. At full throttle, passengers couldn't hear themselves think. The exhaust note overwhelmed everything, a sound so visceral and aggressive that it triggered something deep in the human brain, some ancient response to power and danger that transcended rational thought. People who rode in LS6 Chevelle in 1970 still remember the sound 50 years later, can still hear it in their dreams, still feel the vibration in their chest as the big block wound toward redline. But the LS6 Chevelle wasn't just a drag strip monster. The chassis, while crude by modern standards, provided surprisingly capable handling for a car of its era. The suspension geometry, derived from GM's A-body platform that dated back to 1964, featured a short long-arm front suspension with coil springs and a solid rear axle located by trailing arms and a panhard rod. With the heavy-duty components included in the SS package, the Chevelle could navigate winding roads with confidence, though it never pretended to be a sports car. The weight distribution, roughly 57% front and 43% rear, wasn't ideal but could be managed with proper technique. The power steering, while numb by modern standards, provided adequate feedback for spirited driving. The real limitation was the tires. In 1970, even the best bias, ply performance tires couldn't cope with 500 foot-pounds of torque on anything but perfect pavement. Radial tires were available as aftermarket options, but weren't offered by Chevrolet. Experienced drivers learned to modulate the throttle, waiting for the tires to grip before unleashing full power. The inexperienced either spun the tires uselessly or looped the car into ditches. Insurance companies documented the results with mounting horror. The insurance industry's response to the LS6 Chevelle was swift and brutal. By mid-1970, major insurers had identified high-performance muscle cars as unacceptable risks and implemented surcharges that often exceeded the car's monthly payments. A 21-year-old male attempting to insure an LS6 Chevelle faced annual premiums of $2,000 or more, assuming he could find coverage at all. Some insurance companies simply refused to write policies on cars equipped with the LS6 engine, regardless of the driver's age or record. Others required proof of racing experience or mature age before considering coverage. The financial reality made LS6 Chevelle effectively uninsurable for the young buyers who most wanted them. Dealers found themselves with inventory they couldn't move. Not because people didn't want the cars, but because they couldn't afford to own them, even if someone gave them away. The insurance crisis affected all muscle cars, but the LS6 Chevelle, with its advertised 450 horsepower, became the poster child for everything insurers hated about high-performance vehicles. Some buyers attempted to dodge the issue by insuring the car as a base Chevelle and hiding the SS badging. But insurers caught on quickly and began requiring VIN verification before writing policies. The game was over. Production numbers for the 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 tell the story of an era ending in real time. Chevrolet built 4,475 LS6 equipped Chevelle that year, split between hardtops and convertibles, 4 speeds and automatics. That might sound like a lot until you compare it to total Chevelle SS production of over 53,000 units, most equipped with a far more affordable LS5 454, rated at 360 horsepower. The LS6 cost an additional $503 over the LS5, a significant premium in $1970, and carried insurance implications that made it financially toxic. Many of those 4,000 cars sat on dealer lots for months, eventually sold at discounts to move inventory before the 1971 models arrived. Some dealers removed the LS6 engines and installed milder power plants just to make the cars saleable. A few LS6 Chevelles were never sold at all, sitting in dealer storage until they were scrapped years later. Victims of an insurance industry that had declared war on performance and an economy sliding into recession. The buyers who did manage to purchase LS6 Chevelles in 1970 were either wealthy enough to afford the insurance, old enough to get reasonable rates, or willing to drive uninsured and hope for the best. Many were drag racers who immediately stripped the cars for competition, where insurance wasn't required and performance was everything. The real-world ownership experience of an LS6 Chevelle in 1970 demanded commitment few buyers anticipated. Fuel consumption hovered around 8 miles per gallon in spirited driving, maybe 12 on the highway if you kept your foot out of it. The engine required leaded premium fuel. Anything less caused detonation that could destroy pistons in minutes. The solid lifter valve train needed adjustment every few thousand miles. Ignition points wore out regularly, requiring replacement and timing adjustment. The carburetor needed periodic rebuilding to maintain proper fuel delivery. Daily driving revealed more compromises. Air conditioning wasn't available with the LS6, making summer driving in southern states nearly unbearable. The M22 4-speed transmission whined constantly due to its straight-cut gears, a sound that became maddening on long highway drives. The clutch required substantial leg effort, turning city traffic into a workout. The power brakes, while better than manual brakes, still required substantial pedal pressure, and repeated hard stops from high-speed caused brake fade that left drivers pumping the pedal desperately. The Cal induction hood scoop sometimes allowed rain into the engine bay, causing starting problems on wet days. The interior, despite bucket seats and a console, was still fundamentally a mid-priced family car with hard plastics, cheap carpeting, and minimal sound deadening. Many LS6 owners quickly discovered they'd bought a car that demanded constant attention, mechanical knowledge, and deep pockets. The romance of owning the most powerful muscle car ever built faded quickly when faced with the reality of keeping it running. Yet for all its compromises and difficulties, the LS6 Chevelle delivered an experience that modern cars simply cannot replicate. The directness of the connection between driver and machine, unfiltered by electronics or computer management, created engagement that transcended mere transportation. You felt everything. Every gear change transmitted through the shifter, every ounce of torque pushing through the driveline, every fraction of available traction at the rear wheels. The car demanded attention and skill. You couldn't just jump in and drive casually while texting or adjusting climate controls. The LS6 required focus, demanded respect, and rewarded competence with performance that felt faster than any objective measurement could capture. Modern cars achieve better numbers with less drama, but they also isolate the driver from the experience. The LS6 Chevelle made you part of the machine, connected you to the mechanical violence happening under the hood, let you feel like you were accomplishing something significant every time you drove it hard. That sensation, that involvement, that requirement for skill and bravery defined the muscle car era and explains why these machines remain desirable 50 years after they were built. The street racing culture that existed in 1970 gave the LS6 Chevelle its real-world proving ground. Long before organized drag racing became accessible to average enthusiasts, street racing provided the venue where reputations were made and legends were born. Friday and Saturday nights across America, LS6 Chevelle prowled main streets and back roads, looking for challengers. The typical race was impromptu. Two cars pulled alongside at a stoplight, drivers exchanged glances, engines revved, and when the light changed, both cars launched. Races rarely lasted more than a few hundred feet, just long enough to establish dominance. The LS6's massive torque gave it devastating advantage in these brief encounters. While Hemi cars needed to wind out to make power and small block cars had to be shifted perfectly, the LS6 just hooked and pulled from any speed in any gear. Street racers learned quickly that picking fights with LS6 Chevelle was a losing proposition. The smart ones declined the challenge. The stubborn ones went home humiliated, making excuses about bad tires or missed shifts while the Chevelle disappeared into the night. These informal competitions created the LS6's reputation more than any magazine test ever could. Word spread through high school parking lots and factory break rooms. There's a guy with an LS6 Chevelle and nobody can touch him. The 1970 model year represented the absolute zenith of the muscle car era, and everyone involved knew it. Federal emission regulations would begin taking effect in 1971, requiring engines to run on lower-octane unleaded fuel with catalytic converters that choked performance. The corporate average fuel economy standards were coming, though not yet enacted, putting pressure on manufacturers to reduce engine sizes and improve efficiency. Safety regulations mandated equipment that added weight to every car: side impact beams, stronger bumpers, additional crash structure. The cultural moment that made muscle cars desirable was passing too. The youth market that drove muscle car sales was aging, starting families, buying houses, shifting priorities from quarter-mile times to practicality and economy. The Vietnam War, which had created prosperity for many young workers in defense industries, was winding down. The economy, which had roared through most of the 1960s, was beginning to stumble. Inflation was rising. Interest rates were climbing. The party was ending, and the LS6 Chevelle was the last call, the final shot before the lights came on and reality returned. Chevrolet brought the LS6 back for 1971, but it wasn't the same engine. Compression dropped to 9:1 to accommodate lower-octane fuel. The camshaft was milder. The advertised power rating fell to 425 horsepower, though the actual output had dropped much more substantially to perhaps 375 horsepower using the same gross rating method. The engine still made good power, but it wasn't the monster from 1970. More importantly, buyers had disappeared. The insurance situation had worsened, if anything, and the cultural appetite for high-performance cars had evaporated. Chevrolet built only 188 LS6 Chevelle for 1971, a 95% drop from the previous year. That microscopic production run made the 1971 LS6 more exclusive than the legendary ZL1 Camaro, though nobody cared at the time because the market had moved on. After 1971, the LS6 disappeared forever. Chevrolet continued offering big blocks in the Chevelle through the mid-70s, but they were shadows of their former selves. Low compression, smog-choked motors that made torque but not power, engines designed to meet regulations rather than set records. The LS6 was gone, and with it, an entire philosophy of automobile design. The 1970s and 80s were dark decades for the LS6 Chevelle. The cars depreciated rapidly as gas prices soared following the Arab oil embargo of 1973. Big block muscle cars became symbols of a wasteful past, gas-guzzling dinosaurs that responsible citizens sold or scrapped in favor of economical imports. Many LS6 Chevelle ended up in junkyards, their drivetrains pulled for use in trucks or hot rods, their bodies crushed and forgotten. The survivors often suffered worse fates, modified with aftermarket parts that destroyed originality, painted in garish colors, equipped with headers and drag slicks and roll bars that made them unusable for anything but racing. Finding an unmolested, numbers-matching LS6 Chevelle became increasingly difficult as the years passed. The cars simply weren't valued the way they would be later. A 1970 LS6 Chevelle in good condition might sell for $3,000 in 1980, less than it cost when new, and finding buyers even at that price was challenging. The muscle car market was dead, and nobody expected it to return. The resurrection began in the mid-1980s, when baby boomers who'd lusted after muscle cars as teenagers started achieving the financial success to buy the toys they dreamed about. Suddenly, there was demand for original, well-preserved examples of the cars that had defined their youth. As collectors began seriously pursuing muscle cars, they discovered something interesting. The 1970 LS6 Chevelle, which had seemed common at the time, had become genuinely rare. Of the 4,475 produced, perhaps 40% had survived in any form, and fewer than 10% remained original and unmodified. The combination of low production, high attrition, and legendary performance created a perfect storm of collectability. Prices began climbing in the 1990s, accelerated through the 2000s, and exploded after the 2008 financial crisis as wealthy collectors sought alternative investments. Today, a numbers-matching 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 in excellent condition commands $300,000 or more at auction. Particularly desirable examples, such as 4-speed convertibles with rare options and documented histories, have sold for over $500,000. The car that dealers couldn't give away in 1971 is now among the most valuable American muscle cars ever built. What makes the LS6 Chevelle special isn't just its performance or rarity, it's what the car represents. The absolute peak of an era when American manufacturers built cars primarily to go fast, when engineers were allowed to prioritize power over everything else, when you could buy devastating performance from a dealership showroom. Every muscle car that came after 1970 was a compromise, neutered by regulations, restricted by insurance concerns, limited by corporate caution. The LS6 Chevelle was the last car built before compromise became mandatory. It was also proof that General Motors, when properly motivated, could build machinery that matched or exceeded anything from Ford or Chrysler. The Hemi might have more mystique, the Boss engines might have more sophistication, but nothing matched the LS6's combination of brutal power and everyday usability. You could drive an LS6 Chevelle daily if you were tough enough and rich enough to feed it. The engine didn't require constant rebuilding like race motors. The car didn't need trailer transport to events. It was simply a devastating performance machine that happened to have turn signals and a license plate. The engineering that created the LS6 represented decades of accumulated knowledge about making power from big block V8s. Every component reflected lessons learned racing on drag strips, ovals, and road courses throughout the 1960s. The cylinder head design came from flow bench testing. The camshaft timing represented thousands of dyno hours. The compression ratio balanced power with pump gas reliability. The forged bottom end was built to survive sustained abuse. Nothing about the LS6 was accidental or arbitrary. It was the culmination of GM's performance engineering expertise, built without the budget constraints that typically limited production engines. When Chevrolet's engineers were finally unleashed to build the ultimate street big block, the LS6 was the result. The fact that it existed for only 2 model years and only 1 year in full strength makes it both tragic and special. The LS6 was the answer to a question Detroit would never ask again. How much power can we make in a production engine without worrying about consequences? The LS6 Chevelle also represented a particular moment in American culture, the tail end of the 1960s, when youth culture still celebrated speed and power before environmental and safety concerns became dominant. The buyers who ordered these cars in 1970 were making a statement, rejecting the cautious conservatism that was beginning to take hold, insisting that performance and excitement still mattered even as the world around them changed. They were the last generation to experience muscle cars as contemporary transportation rather than nostalgic collectibles. They got to feel 500 foot-pounds of torque shove them back in their seats, heard the LS6's war cry at full throttle, experienced the visceral thrill of acceleration that modern cars can match numerically but not emotionally. Those experiences shaped their automotive passions for life, creating the collector market that exists today and ensuring the LS6 Chevelle's legacy would outlive its production era. The technical specifications tell part of the story, but they can't capture what the LS6 Chevelle meant to people who saw one new on a dealer lot, who scraped together enough money to buy one, who risked their insurance rates and fuel budgets to own the ultimate expression of American muscle. For those people, the LS6 wasn't just transportation or even performance. It was possibility, freedom, rebellion, and excitement compressed into sheet metal and horsepower. It was proof that ordinary people could own extraordinary machines. that dealerships sold weapons of mass acceleration, that the automotive establishment still cared about building cars that stirred emotions beyond mere applause. The LS6 Chevelle was the last time that was completely, unambiguously true in American automotive history. Have you ever seen a 1970 Chevelle SS 454 LS6 in person, heard that engine running, or felt what 450 horsepower felt like in 1970? Do you remember when muscle cars were new, when the horsepower wars were still being fought, when American manufacturers built cars that prioritized straight-line speed above everything else? The LS6 Chevelle stands as testament to an era when such priorities were possible, when regulations hadn't yet strangled performance, when insurance companies hadn't yet made power prohibitively expensive, when American engineering was allowed to pursue excess without apology. That era ended with the 1970 LS6, making these cars not just collectibles, but historical artifacts, mechanical time capsules, preserving a moment when Detroit built the fastest, most powerful cars the industry would produce for decades. If you enjoyed this exploration of the muscle car that ended an era, subscribe for more stories about the machines, engineers, and moments that defined American automotive history. The stories are out there, waiting to be told, and every one of them deserves to be remembered.